The sudden sound of breaking glass shattered the calm evening air of Silver Creek, as Naomi Lawson tried desperately to free herself from the iron grip of three drunken men who had cornered her behind the town's busiest saloon. The year was 1876, and the small Wyoming Territory settlement was still rough around the edges, a place where a woman alone after sunset was considered fair game by men of a certain disposition. "Let me go," Naomi cried out, her voice straining as she fought against their hold. At 22, she had grown accustomed to unwanted attention since taking over her father's general store 6 months prior, but nothing like this. The smell of whiskey was overwhelming as they pressed closer, their laughter cruel in the dimming light. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be wandering about all alone," slurred the largest of the three, his face inches from hers. His companions tightened their grip on her arms as she struggled. "I was just heading home," Naomi said firmly, trying to mask the fear in her voice. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its pins in the struggle, and she could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "Please, just let me pass." The men only laughed harder. "We'll see you home, won't we, boys?" The leader's words were met with approving grunts as they began to drag her further into the shadowy alley. Naomi opened her mouth to scream when the unmistakable sound of a revolver's hammer being cocked froze everyone in place. "I believe the lady asked you to let her pass." The voice was low, steady, and carried an undeniable threat. The three men turned, still holding Naomi between them. At the mouth of the alley stood a tall figure, silhouetted against the fading daylight. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the cowboy hat or the steady hand holding the Colt .45. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the leader growled, though his grip on Naomi loosened slightly. "I'm making it my concern." The cowboy stepped forward, and as he moved into the light spilling from a nearby window, Naomi could see him clearly for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair peeking out from under his hat, and eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar ran along his jaw, and dust from the trail still clung to his duster. "Now, you've got two choices," the cowboy continued, his voice never rising above that dangerous calm. "You can walk away right now, or you can try your luck. Either way, the lady's coming with me." For a moment, it seemed the drunks might challenge him. The leader's hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. In one fluid motion, the cowboy aimed his revolver at a bottle sitting on a nearby crate and fired. The glass exploded, and Naomi felt the hands holding her suddenly release. "Last chance," the cowboy said. The three men backed away, muttering curses but clearly unwilling to test the stranger's aim when it might be their heads in his sights next time. They stumbled past him, giving him a wide berth as they disappeared into the main street. Naomi stood frozen, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they would support her. The cowboy holstered his weapon and approached slowly, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. I don't think so," Naomi managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. She tried to take a step forward and felt her knees buckle beneath her. Before she could fall, the cowboy closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He caught her easily, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you," he said simply. "Name's Luke Winters. Where can I take you?" "Lawson General Store," she replied, too exhausted and relieved to protest being carried. "I live in the rooms above. I'm Naomi." "Naomi Lawson." Luke nodded and began walking toward Main Street, still carrying her securely against his chest. Naomi could feel the steady beat of his heart, solid and reassuring. For the first time since the attack, she took a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't come along." "No need to think about that now," Luke interrupted gently. "You're safe." As they emerged onto the street, several townsfolk turned to stare. Naomi felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Luke's stride never faltered. He carried her down the boardwalk with such confidence that no one dared question him. When they reached the general store, Luke waited patiently as Naomi fumbled for the key in her pocket. He managed to unlock the door without putting her down, nudging it open with his boot. Inside, the familiar smells of coffee beans, leather, and fabric surrounded them. Luke carefully set Naomi down on a chair behind the counter. "You have anyone who stays with you?" he asked, his eyes scanning the store's interior. Naomi shook her head. Not since my father passed. It's just me now, Luke frowned. Those men might come back once they've worked up the courage. Do you have a neighbor you trust, someone who could stay with you tonight? Mrs. Hutchins next door keeps to herself, and the Millers across the way are out of town. Naomi pushed a strand of hair from her face. I'll be fine. I have my father's shotgun upstairs. Luke removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. In the lamplight, Naomi could see the weariness in his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun and longer nights on the trail. If you don't mind, Miss Lawson, I'd feel better if I kept watch tonight. I can sleep in that chair by the door. He gestured to a rocking chair near the entrance. Just to make sure those fellas don't get any more ideas. Naomi hesitated. Allowing a stranger to stay the night, even one who had just saved her, went against everything she'd been taught about propriety. But the thought of being alone with only a locked door between her and those men made her shudder. I don't even know you, Mr. Winters. That's true enough, Luke acknowledged with a slight smile. I'm just passing through on my way to Denver. Was a ranch hand up in Montana until recently, decided to try my luck elsewhere. I don't make a habit of sleeping in ladies' stores if that's your concern. Despite everything, Naomi found herself returning his smile. There was something about his straightforward manner that put her at ease. Very well, she said finally. You can stay, but just for tonight. Luke nodded and replaced his hat. I'll need to see to my horse. She's hitched outside the saloon. Will you be all right for a few minutes? Naomi squared her shoulders, feeling a bit of her usual confidence returning. Yes. I'll lock the door behind you. When Luke returned 15 minutes later, leading a dappled gray mare, Naomi had changed into a clean dress and tidied her hair. She'd also put on a kettle for coffee and set out some bread and preserves on the small table she kept near the store's potbelly stove. Your horse can stay in the small stable out back, she said, opening the rear door for him. There's fresh hay and I can spare some oats in the morning. Luke looked surprised at the offer. That's mighty kind of you, Miss Lawson. After settling his mare, Luke returned to find Naomi pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. The aroma filled the store, rich and inviting. I thought you might be hungry, she said, gesturing to the simple meal. It's not much, but it's fresh. Luke removed his hat and gun belt, setting them carefully on a nearby shelf before taking a seat. It looks like a feast to me. Been living on jerky and hardtack for too long. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the events of the evening hanging between them. Finally, Naomi spoke. How did you happen to be there? Behind the saloon, I mean. Luke took a sip of his coffee before answering, was cutting through to the livery, heard a commotion, then your voice. He met her eyes directly. I don't abide men who can't take no for an answer. Naomi nodded, lowering her gaze to her coffee. Well, I'm grateful. I've lived in Silver Creek all my life, but it's different now that I'm running the store alone. Some men seem to think a woman without a husband or father is. She trailed off, unable to find the right words. Available, Luke finished for her, his expression darkening. Men like that are the same everywhere. Montana, Wyoming, doesn't matter. Is that why you left Montana? Naomi asked, curious about this man who had so suddenly entered her life. A shadow crossed Luke's face. Partly. Ranch I worked for changed hands. New owner brought in his own men. He shrugged. Time to move on anyway. Naomi sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, she gathered the dishes and carried them to the small wash basin. I'll show you where you can clean up if you'd like, she offered. There's a washroom behind the kitchen. I keep a tub back there for Saturday nights. Luke's expression was one of profound gratitude. A real wash would be welcome. Been a while since I've had more than a splash from a canteen. Naomi busied herself preparing the washroom while Luke brought in his saddlebags. She showed him where to find fresh towels and soap, then retreated upstairs to her own rooms, leaving him to his privacy. In her bedroom, Naomi sat at her small vanity and brushed out her hair, her mind replaying the evening's events. She couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when she thought of Luke Winters, with his storm-gray eyes and gentle hands. It had been a long time since she'd felt that way about anyone. After her father's death, most of the young men in town had come calling, but Naomi knew it was the store they were after more than her hand. The Lawson General Store was one of the most successful businesses in Silver Creek, and a ready-made livelihood for any man willing to take on its proprietress as well. Naomi had sent them all away. She was determined to run the store herself, to honor her father's memory and maintain her independence. But sometimes, in the quiet evenings after closing, loneliness crept in like a cold draft under a door. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Lawson, everything all right up there?" Luke's voice came through the door at the bottom of the stairs. "Yes, thank you," she called back. "I'll be down shortly." When Naomi descended the stairs, she found Luke seated in the rocking chair by the door, just as he'd promised. He'd cleaned up considerably, his dark hair still damp and his face freshly shaved. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and without the trail, dust, and days' growth of beard, he looked younger, though still every bit as capable. "I've made up a pallet for you," Naomi said, pointing to the bedroll she'd arranged near the stove. "It'll be warmer there than by the door." Luke seemed about to protest, then thought better of it. "Thank you, but I'll still keep watch from here, at least until you're asleep." Naomi nodded, understanding his concern. "Would you like something to read? The nights can be long when you're keeping watch." She selected a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans from a small shelf of books she kept for sale and handed it to him. "My father's favorite," she explained. "He used to read it every winter." Luke accepted the book with careful hands. "My ma used to read to us kids in the evenings. Don't get much chance for reading on the trail." "Us kids?" Naomi inquired, settling into a chair across from him. "4 of us, I'm the oldest. 2 brothers and a sister, all back in Kansas with Ma." A softness crept into his voice when he spoke of his family. "Pa died when I was 16. I stayed until the young ones were old enough to help Ma with the farm, then headed west." "Do you write to them?" "When I can," Luke admitted. "Though I'm not much of a letter writer. Ma always says my notes read like cattle tallies." Naomi laughed, and the sound seemed to surprise them both. After the fear of earlier, it felt good to laugh, to sit in her store with the lamps burning low and talk with this stranger who no longer felt quite so strange. "Tell me about your father," Luke said, leaning back in the rocking chair. "Must have been a good man to raise a daughter brave enough to run a store on her own." Naomi's smile turned wistful. "He was. Came out here with nothing but a wagon of goods and a dream, built this place board by board." She glanced around the store, at the shelves her father had crafted and the counter where he'd taught her to count change. "He always said I had a head for business. Never once suggested I couldn't take over when he was gone, even though plenty of folks in town thought otherwise." "And have you proved them wrong?" "So far," Naomi said with a touch of pride. "Business is better than ever. I've added a millinery section that's quite popular with the ladies, and I've arranged better shipping terms with suppliers in Cheyenne." Luke nodded appreciatively. "Impressive." They continued talking as the night deepened around them, sharing stories of their lives, discovering common ground despite their different paths. Luke told her about his years working ranches across the territories, about cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the way. Naomi spoke of growing up in Silver Creek, watching it transform from a rough settlement to a proper town, and of her dreams to expand the store someday. It was well past midnight when Naomi finally rose from her chair, stifling a yawn. "I should get some sleep." Morning comes early in the mercantile business. Luke stood as well, ever the gentleman. "Of course, I'll be right here if you need anything." Naomi hesitated at the foot of the stairs. "Mr. Winters, Luke, thank you again, not just for earlier, but for staying. It's been nice to have someone to talk to." Their eyes met in the dim lamplight, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection neither had expected to find. "Good night, Naomi," Luke said softly. "Good night, Luke." Naomi slept better than she expected, knowing Luke was keeping watch below. When she came downstairs at dawn, she found him already awake, stoking the stove and brewing coffee. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the pot. "Thought you might appreciate a hot cup before starting your day." "Mind, it's a luxury to have coffee waiting," Naomi said, genuinely pleased. "Usually I'm doing everything myself." As they shared breakfast, Luke mentioned he'd planned to leave that morning, continuing on to Denver. Naomi felt a surprising pang of disappointment at the news. "Of course," she said, keeping her tone light. "You've already been more than kind, delaying your journey to watch over me." Luke seemed about to say something when the front door rattled with a forceful knock. They exchanged a glance, and Luke immediately moved to position himself between Naomi and the entrance, his hand dropping to his holster. "Who's there?" Naomi called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Sheriff Morris, Miss Lawson, need a word with you." Luke relaxed slightly but remained alert as Naomi unlocked the door. Sheriff Elias Morris, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a salt and pepper mustache, stepped inside, his eyes immediately falling on Luke. "Morning, Sheriff," Naomi greeted him. "This is Mr. Winters." "He's passing through town." The sheriff nodded curtly. "Mr. Winters." His gaze returned to Naomi. "Had some trouble reported last night. 3 men claiming they were threatened at gunpoint behind the Silverado." "Is that so?" Naomi's voice was cool. "Did they happen to mention what they were doing before they were supposedly threatened?" Sheriff Morris sighed, removing his hat. "They didn't, but Mrs. Peterson saw enough from her window above the bakery. Said you were in some distress and this gentleman came to your aid." He looked at Luke with new respect. "That how it happened?" Luke nodded. "Yes, sir, the lady was being harassed. I intervened." "Well then," the sheriff said, replacing his hat, "seems I owe you thanks rather than questions, Mr. Winters. Those 3 have been causing trouble since they drifted into town last week. I've given them until noon to clear out of Silver Creek." He turned to Naomi. "You all right, Miss Lawson? Your father would haunt me from the grave if I let anything happen to his girl." "I'm fine, Sheriff, thanks to Mr. Winters." After the sheriff left, promising to check back later, Naomi and Luke stood in awkward silence. The morning light streamed through the store windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "I suppose you'll be wanting to get on your way," Naomi finally said, moving behind the counter to prepare for opening the store. Luke ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Actually, I was thinking, Denver's not going anywhere. And those men might not heed the sheriff's warning." Naomi looked up from the ledger she'd been pretending to study. "What are you suggesting?" "Maybe I could stay a few more days, just until we're sure they've moved on." Luke's eyes met hers. "If that wouldn't be an imposition." "It wouldn't," Naomi said, perhaps too quickly. She took a breath, composing herself. "That is, I'd welcome the company, and the extra pair of hands around the store wouldn't hurt either, if you're willing to work for your room and board." Luke's smile was warm, reaching all the way to his eyes. "More than willing." The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Luke proved to be invaluable around the store, his height useful for reaching high shelves and his strength perfect for moving heavy crates. Customers seemed to approve of his presence, especially the older women who had been concerned about Naomi running the place alone. In the evenings, after closing, they would share dinner in the small kitchen behind the store. Luke turned out to be a surprisingly good cook, explaining that on the trail, men who could prepare decent food were always appreciated. "Where did you learn to ride?" Naomi asked one night over a surprisingly tasty rabbit stew Luke had prepared. "My pa taught me before I could walk, or so Ma always claimed," Luke said with a fond smile. "Had my first pony at 5. By 12, I was helping with the neighbors' horses too, just always had a way with them." "I've noticed," Naomi said. She'd seen how gently he handled his mare, how the animal responded to his slightest touch. "Your horse, what's her name?" "Willow," Luke said. "Found her half-starved as a colt, abandoned after an Indian raid on a homestead. Nursed her back myself, been together 6 years now." Naomi smiled at the tenderness in his voice. "She's beautiful. Father always kept a good horse for deliveries, but I've never been much of a rider myself." "I could teach you," Luke offered. "Proper riding, I mean, not just sitting on a horse while it plods along." "I'd like that," Naomi said softly. True to his word, the following Sunday when the store was closed, Luke took Naomi out riding. He borrowed a gentle gelding from the livery and patiently showed her how to properly mount, how to hold the reins, how to move with the horse rather than against it. They rode out of town, following the creek that gave Silver Creek its name until they reached a small meadow bursting with wildflowers. There, they dismounted for a picnic lunch Naomi had packed. "You're a natural," Luke said as they sat on a blanket spread over the grass. "Most folks take longer to get comfortable in the saddle." Naomi smiled, feeling a pleasant warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "I had a good teacher." As they ate, they talked about their hopes for the future. Naomi spoke of her plans to expand the store, perhaps adding a proper dress shop section with the latest fashions from back east. "What about you?" she asked Luke. "What are you hoping to find in Denver?" Luke was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. Was thinking I might find work with one of the bigger outfits there, or maybe try my hand at something new." He looked at her then, his expression open and unguarded. "Been on the move so long, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to stay somewhere, put down roots." Their eyes held, and Naomi felt her heart quicken. In the week since Luke had come into her life, something had changed between them. What had begun as gratitude had grown into friendship, and now there was something more, something neither had put into words yet. The moment was interrupted by the distant rumble of thunder. They looked up to see dark clouds gathering over the mountains. "We should head back," Luke said, though he sounded reluctant. "That storm's moving fast." They packed up quickly and mounted their horses, but they'd only made it halfway back to town when the skies opened. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them within minutes. Lightning flashed, followed by a boom of thunder that spooked the horses. "There's an old line shack up ahead," Luke called over the storm, pointing to a small structure nestled among some trees. "We can wait it out there." The shack was basic but sound, with a small stone fireplace and enough dry wood stacked inside to start a fire. While Luke tended to the horses, securing them under a lean-to attached to the side of the shack, Naomi worked on getting a fire going. By the time Luke came in, shaking water from his hat, Naomi had a small blaze crackling in the fireplace. The single room was slowly warming, but they were both soaked to the skin. "You're shivering," Luke observed, concern in his voice. "I'm all right," Naomi insisted, though her teeth were chattering. Her dress, heavy with rainwater, clung to her uncomfortably. Luke shrugged out of his duster and hung it near the fire to dry, then began rummaging through the shack's sparse contents. He found an old blanket that, while dusty, seemed clean enough. "Here," he said, offering it to Naomi, "you should get out of those wet clothes. I'll step outside while you change, and stand in the rain. Don't be ridiculous." Naomi took the blanket but shook her head firmly. "Turn your back, I'll let you know when I'm decent." Luke obliged, facing the wall while Naomi struggled out of her sodden dress. She wrapped the blanket around herself like a shawl, covering her chemise and petticoat, which were also damp but not as completely soaked. "You can turn around now," she said, spreading her dress near the fire to dry. Luke had removed his own wet shirt, leaving him in an undershirt that did little to hide his broad shoulders and the strong lines of his chest. Naomi felt her cheeks warm, and she quickly looked away. "Storm might last a while," Luke said, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. He moved to the small window, peering out at the dark sky. "At least we're dry." Naomi joined him at the window, the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "It's beautiful in its way," she said, watching lightning illuminate the landscape. "Powerful. Like you," Luke said quietly. Naomi turned to find him looking at her, not at the storm. His eyes were intense, focused entirely on her face. "Me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, you." Luke's voice was low, earnest. "Running that store alone, standing up to those men, never backing down from a challenge. I've known hardened cowboys with less spine than you, Naomi Lawson." No one had ever spoken to her that way before, with such genuine admiration. Naomi felt something shift between them, as if the last barrier had finally fallen away. "Luke," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing she needed to say something. He closed the distance between them slowly, giving her every chance to step away. But Naomi didn't want to move. When his hand came up to cup her cheek, she leaned into his touch. "I didn't plan on staying in Silver Creek," Luke whispered. "Didn't plan on meeting someone like you." "I'm glad you did," Naomi replied, her voice equally soft. "Stay, I mean, and meet me." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered. When they parted, Luke's expression was one of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "I've been wanting to do that since that first night," he admitted. Sitting in your store talking until dawn, Naomi smiled, feeling a joy she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. Why didn't you? Wasn't sure you felt the same, and I didn't want to seem like I expected anything after helping you. I didn't at first, Naomi said honestly. But then I got to know you, Luke Winters, the real you, not just the cowboy who came to my rescue. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small shack, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of emotions too long contained, of feelings growing stronger with each passing moment. When they returned to Silver Creek that evening, after the rain had finally subsided, something had undeniably changed. They didn't speak of it directly, but it was there in the way Luke's hand lingered on Naomi's as he helped her down from her horse, in the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. Over the next few weeks, Luke's temporary stay extended without either of them mentioning his original plans to move on. He became a fixture at the store, learning the business quickly and suggesting improvements that Naomi eagerly implemented. Together, they rearranged the layout to create better flow, expanded the inventory to include more items for ranchers, and even set up a small reading area with a few chairs where customers could browse the growing selection of books. The townsfolk began to accept Luke's presence, and soon it seemed as if he had always been part of Silver Creek. He helped old Mr. Peterson repair his roof, taught the schoolchildren how to properly care for horses during a special presentation, and even assisted Sheriff Morris in tracking down a horse thief who had plagued the area. And each evening after the store closed, Luke and Naomi would spend hours talking, sharing meals, and slowly, carefully falling in love. It was on a warm June evening, almost 2 months after Luke had first carried Naomi to safety, that he finally spoke of the future. They were sitting on the small porch behind the store, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. I had a letter from my mother today, Luke said, his hand holding Naomi's. She's asking when I'm coming to visit, says it's been too long. Naomi felt a flutter of anxiety. Was this his way of saying he was leaving? You should go, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Family is important. Luke turned to face her fully. I was thinking maybe you could come with me, meet my family. He took a deep breath. And then maybe we could come back here, together. Permanently, Naomi's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. Luke, are you asking? I love you, Naomi, he said simply. I think I have since that first night when you offered me coffee and conversation instead of just sending me on my way. I know it hasn't been that long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. This was my grandmother's, he explained, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl at its center. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, Naomi interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. And yes, I'll marry you, Luke Winters. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Naomi reflected on how strangely life worked sometimes. If not for those drunken men, if not for Luke's timely intervention, they might never have met. Out of something frightening and ugly had come this beautiful, unexpected love. Their wedding took place in late summer, with the whole town turning out to celebrate. Sheriff Morris gave the bride away, and Mrs. Hutchins, who had become a dear friend to Naomi over the past months, stood as her matron of honor. Luke's family traveled from Kansas for the occasion, his mother weeping happy tears as she welcomed Naomi into the family. After a brief trip to visit Luke's family in Kansas, the newlyweds returned to Silver Creek to build their life together. They expanded the store, adding a proper hardware section that Luke managed while Naomi continued to oversee the dry goods and clothing. Their home above the store, once lonely and quiet, now rang with laughter and love. 2 years after their wedding, their family grew with the birth of their daughter, Emma, followed 18 months later by their son, James. The children grew up in the store, learning the business just as Naomi had from her father. Luke taught them to ride almost as soon as they could walk, fulfilling his promise that his children would know horses as he had. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on that same porch where Luke had proposed, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been? She asked, leaning against her husband's strong shoulder. If you hadn't decided to cut through that alley that night, Luke's arm tightened around her. I try not to, makes my blood run cold thinking what might have happened to you. Not that, Naomi said softly. I mean us, if we'd never met. Luke was quiet for a moment, watching their children play in the yard, Emma showing her little brother how to catch fireflies in a jar. I think we would have found each other somehow, he said finally. Some things are just meant to be. Naomi smiled, turning her face up for his kiss. From violence and fear had come safety and a love that had built a family, a business, a life filled with joy. And as the sun set over Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Naomi Lawson Winters knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the cowboy who had carried her to safety and into a love that would last a lifetime.